Hi, my name is Olivia Groves, and today my group and I are presenting about the ecological succession in Point Pleasant Park after Hurricane Juan in Halifax, Nova Scotia. So on September 28th to 29th, 2003, Hurricane Juan passed through the park and it uprooted thousands of trees and it drastically changed the forest structure. The damage was so severe that the park was closed for 8 months, and when it finally reopened, the landscape looked completely different from the original forest. Because this was a major disturbance in a protected urban forest, it created a rare opportunity to track how forest communities recovers and changes over time. For this lab, Biology 2060 Ecology students collected tree data in permanent study sites that were set up in 2004. These study sites were also set up in the most heavily damaged areas so that they could evaluate disturbance effects and follow ecological succession. For our hypothesis, we're focusing on how the entire forest community has changed since Hurricane Juan, not just the individual species. We predict that ongoing ecological succession between 2004 and 2025 has altered community structure in three main ways. First, the number of species present. Second, the overall diversity in the forest, and the relative importance of the dominant tree. More specifically, we expect that the species richness, which is S, and the Shannon diversity, H prime, to change over time as new species establish and others decline. We also expect the densities of red spruce and red maple to shift as the forest moves from an early successional state towards a more mature Acadian forest. From that hypothesis, we went with a few objectives to describe how the forest changed through time. First, we wanted to document how the forest structure in Point Pleasant Park developed since the initial disturbance. We used permanent plots to follow the same location over multiple years. Second, we tracked the changes in the tree species composition between 2004 and 2025, and we were asking whether the community is becoming more mixed, more dominated by a few species, or moving towards a different type of forest. Third, we examine structural features like stem density and the canopy closure to see whether they resemble the late successional Acadian forest or indicate a shift to a new community state. And then we will quantify the changes in species richness and Shannon diversity so that we can link the visible changes in the forest to clear quantity numerical measures of succession.
I will briefly introduce the methods part. The study was conducted in Point Pleasant Park in Halifax, which experienced Hurricane Juan in 2003. We established 6 study sites and monitored the tree community annually from 2004 to 2025. Each year, we recorded the density of tree species within 400 square meter plots. Not all trees were recorded. Only trees with a dBH greater than or equal to 2.5 centimeters were recorded. dBH is a standard measurement used to estimate wood volume, and it also allows comparison across scientific studies. From this data, we calculated several community metrics, including species richness, Shannon diversity, and P-loss evenness index. To estimate how these metrics changed over time, we used the linear regression, which shows the relationship between time and the data, and it also identifies trends over time.
The diversity index changed over time and why? What can you predict will happen as the forest approaches its climax community and why? First, the diversity index increases greatly, roughly 5 to 10 years after the hurricane. The graph then levels off for a while before falling slightly in the last 5-ish years. The first part of this trend is likely due to the abundance of resources such as light after the storm, allowing all species to reap the benefits. Second, as the forest matures, the diversity index will likely continue to go a little lower, as the larger, dominant species such as red maple and red spruce outcompete the others, mainly by blocking access to light. Figure 1 is a linear regression of the Shannon Diversity Index plotted against each year following Hurricane Juan. The results of this regression provided an R-squared value of 0.33, indicating that the trend line is a poor fit to the data. The p-value indicates statistical significance, meaning that this trend line, although not completely accurate, does point towards the fact that there is a correlation between the index and time, and that this has probably not happened by chance. It is important to note that the density of data points appears to follow a logistic pattern, quickly accelerating after the storm and leveling off roughly 10 years later. In the last 5 years, the density of points appears to return to the trend line, indicating a potential downturn in the diversity index.
Here I'll answer question 2, which is asking how the dominant tree in 2004 and the dominant tree in 2025 changed in density over time, why that happened, and what we expect to happen as the forest keeps moving towards a climax community. To answer it, I'll focus on 2 species, which is red maple, and that becomes the dominant tree by 2025, and the red spruce, which is slower growing, but more typical of like a late shade-tolerant forest. Looking at the red maple first, its density increases a lot from 2004 to 2025. With many more stems per 400 square meters in the later years. The upward trend in the graph shows that red maple has become the most abundant tree in our plots and is currently the dominant species. The big jump here is likely because of right after Hurricane Juan, red maple seedlings and saplings were able to take advantage of the high light levels and the open space that was created by the disturbance, so that increased their numbers and their population. Now looking at the red spruce results, it also increases in density over time, but the change is much slower and it doesn't reach the same high values as the red maple. The upward trend suggests a steady, gradual recruitment of spruce into the stand rather than just a rapid blow in population. Since the red spruce grows more slowly and is more shade tolerant, this does make sense, and it will be better suited to later stages of succession. And then with time, when the canopy continues to close and the forest becomes like more mature again, it would be expected that the red spruce will keep growing their population.
I focus on species richness as our community metric. Our results show that species richness increased over time after the hurricane disturbance. This could be explained by ecological succession, because hurricane made more free space for new species to establish. And we predict that species richness will be stabilized as the ecosystem becomes more balanced and most niches become occupied. This graph shows the change in species richness. As you can see from the trend line, species richness gradually increased over time. The R-square value indicates a moderate relationship between time and species richness. This result supports the idea that the forest is undergoing ecological succession and recovery after the disturbance.
In conclusion, we found that forest diversity increased, likely due to less interference competition by other trees. Red maple became the dominant tree species, with red spruce also increasing since the storm. Finally, richness increased, likely due to the abundance of resources available. Finally, we would like to thank past Dalhousie students and instructors for collecting the data, Professor Zaguris for making the graphs, and acknowledge that Point Pleasant Park is on the traditional lands of the Mi'kmaq people.
So to answer question 1 about since Hurricane Juan, how might the change in forest structure affect how the ecosystem functions? It's asking, like, once the forest structures changed after Juan, what did this actually do to the ecosystem? Well, right after the storm, it was reported that about 70 to 85% of the canopy was taken out, so Point Pleasant Park went from like a uniform, evenly like aged red spruce and white pine forest to a really open forest that was full of light and young trees and ground plants, and this sudden opening created a bloom of plants near the ground for things like shrubs, herbs, insects that use dense, low vegetation. It was also found that the soils in the native seed bank were still in good shape and that most of the regeneration was native species like the red maple and the birch, which this kind of means that like the like seeds or like ingredients for like recovery were already there in the soil, so this is why it was able to recover from the storm. And then like over the next decade, it was showed that the tree numbers like really increased, and the ground layer plants that were like first like increased right after the storm, they like gradually decreased as like the canopy closed, like so when they lost light. That tells us that the forest like moved from an open early successional state back towards like the more closed mixed-aged Acadian forest that it was originally. This pattern is consistent with other studies that from other hurricanes. It's kind of like a patchy mixed age structure that creates more types of habitats and break the forest up into like different ecosystems. This like kind of patchiness, it tends to spread the wind damage out. So if a big storm were to hit again, then the park could be more resilient than it was, because like they won't like the different heights and levels of the ecosystem. It won't all the trees won't just be knocked down at once.
As an urban forest, human activities can influence forest succession and the species that recolonize the area. The recreational activities, such as walking and biking, can damage plants and compact oil. This may change which species are able to recolonize the forest. An urban forest study has shown that recreational disturbance can significantly influence plant diversity and species composition. The conservational activities could have positive effects. Removing invasive species and garbage can support native biodiversity. A long-term study shows that conservational activities can increase the forest structure complexity and promote native tree recruitment. Overall, human activities in urban forests can both slow down or support ecological succession, depending on how the forest is managed.
How does the species composition of Point Pleasant Park prior to Hurricane Juan differ from species composition we're seeing now? And why might these be different? Joachim, 1985, performed a survey classifying the ecology of Point Pleasant Park, in which he found that roughly 80% of the trees in the park were softwoods, particularly red spruce and white pine. Nearly half of the trees in the park at the time were over 86 years old, which classified the park as overmature. Finally, he found that very little undergrowth was present in the forest. Keep in mind that the study was completed almost 20 years before Hurricane Juan ran through the park. In 2019, another similar survey was completed by Keyes, finding that almost 3/4 of the repopulated area was filled by white birch, red maple, and red spruce. This major change could have happened for a number of reasons, but it appears that hardwoods outcompeted the softwoods right from the start after the hurricane. A sharp increase in red maple after the storm, compared to the slow climb for red spruce, indicates this perfectly. It is also possible that the hardwoods were not as decimated as softwoods after the storm, possibly due to a difference in root structure or shade tolerance.